Welcome to the Dungeon Pastors. I'm Stephen Taylor, and,
I'm Derek, the Geek Preacher White.
we're here to talk to you today about our role-playing games, Evil.
Evil.
And just to cement the whole evil thing, everybody knows the best villains are British.
This is true. This is true. But some of the best heroes are British too.
This is
James
true.
Bond, cough, cough, cough. I love James Bond. So yes, the British do make some of the best villains. I have to say, Nazis make better villains than Brits. Okay.
Yes, but they always get a British actor to play the Nazi.
Yeah, okay, never
Yep.
mind. Never mind. Never mind. Well, we won't go into the history of why that is.
No.
Uh,
No.
Heir to the throne. No, oh my goodness. We're off to a bad start. Let's change pace here. How's your gaming been going, Stephen?
Uh, it's not really. Well, it kind of has-ish. I've had one gaming session since Christmas, and that was recorded and was on Songs of Praise, and we'll put the YouTube video down here. Songs of Praise is the British thing that is on every Sunday. Has songs of praise in it, hymns. It's the Christian half-hour slot, basically. And this one was all centered on autism. And my friend runs game sessions for, well, it was originally a group of autistic people setting it up. So when this Songs of Praise was being recorded, he got asked about it and said, "Oh, well, come and have a look at it." And I went and ran it, along with some other people who also run it. But it's my games that were there. And I did get to play Blood Rage with its most recent expansion on it, which from the Blood Rage digital stuff. And they had lots of panning shots of it throughout the whole show.
I saw that.
Yeah,
I saw that. My
that was kind
son enjoyed watching it with me until the music came on, and he's like, "I don't want to listen
of
to this," which
well,
is really sad for a preacher's kid.
it is, but it could also be he's just fed up of hearing it, to be fair, because it'll be all the time. I can kind of understand it. Uh,
Oh yeah, yeah.
and it is very British hymns as well. So,
Yeah, I heard some of those Charles Wesley hymns on there.
mm.
Yes, made my Methodist heart proud. Speaking of that, hey, did I tell you about this? I may have mentioned it in Slack. One of the things we're doing here in Nashville, Tennessee, in a couple of weeks, a feast day for the Episcopal Church in America, which is
Mm.
Anglican, and they're in full communion with with you guys. Um, One of the things we're doing in March, the Episcopal Diocese of Tennessee and our United Methodist Conference is getting together on the feast day of John and Charles Wesley, and we're having a joint service as we hope this year to come into full communion with the Episcopal Church.
Amazing.
So I'm excited about that. You know, I love my Episcopalian brothers and sisters. I love the Anglican heritage, and I love the hymns of John and Charles Wesley, who, for my Methodist friends out there, he was an Anglican priest till the day he died. So if you want to rediscover Methodism, become more Anglican.
Well, let's be completely honest. If the Anglicans hadn't been quite as up themselves back then, Methodism would never have existed. It would have just been another
That's
arm of
right.
Anglicanism.
If y'all hadn't had that stick up your,
Yeah.
that good old British has started so many wonderful revival movements. And I will tell you, some of the best experiences I've had in a church were when I was at Little St. Mary's in Cambridge. It was one of the most beautiful experiences of worship I've had. This old former Pentecostal preacher just was like adoring the liturgy. And to hear a British man read from the book of Isaiah, you know, we say Isaiah here in America. Over there, it was And now turn to the book of Isaiah, chapter 53.
Well, at
It's
least it
just
wasn't
beautiful.
an Anglo-Catholic church where they chant it. That would be, "Hey,
There
read
was some.
the book of Isaiah."
No, they didn't do that. That would have been cool to just listen to. That would have been cool to listen to, but not the whole 53rd chapter of Isaiah. No. So if I remember right, though, now you didn't get to go to your recent game day. How did they still have the game day? For those of you who are watching or listening, Stephen hosts game days for various churches in his area, and he was ill recently and couldn't make it. Did they still have the game day without you?
No, they weren't able to because I'm the only host of it, and I've got the games and the key. So unfortunately, it
Oh,
had to be cancelled for that one, which is a shame. I don't
yeah.
like doing that, but sometimes, yeah, needs must.
And this is why, what a pastor would say, this is why we need more volunteers. Hint, hint, for anybody listening. If there are activities and things going on at your church or in your community, and you really enjoy those, become a faithful volunteer. Because the lead volunteers, like this guy and like me, we get sick sometimes
Yep.
and we can't make it. And so we need other people to be able to step up and step in and replace us, because for these things to continue going on, other people have to be willing to help out. And it takes the pressure off of us. So if you're in the UK, you're close to Stephen, call him up or shoot him a message. And I know if you said, I'd love to find out how I can help out volunteering first after he is revived from his heart attack, then he will give you 1,000 different ways to help out, or just two or three. But it's essential. I mean, we just had our first game day at this church I'm at, which is so amazing. Can you believe I've been doing geek ministry for 12 years? This is the first church I've ever served where I've had the members come up to me and say, "Hey, Pastor, do you mind if we have a game day here on a Sunday after church?" And I'm like, "Mind? Who are you talking to?" And they had a little twinkle in their eyes. And so we had our first game day this last Sunday. About half the congregation stayed after worship to play games. It was fun. It was enjoyable. I left. This is what was great, Stephen. I haven't had a chance to share this with you and our friends on Slack, but I left. My wife stayed over there for a little while because I'm exhausted. I'd already preached and everything, and I played a game of Forbidden Desert. I played a game of Imhotep, and our son had already gotten worn out. He went home. We came home. I'm starting to think about what I'm going to cook for dinner. My wife finally comes back over. It's around 4:30 in the afternoon. She says, the older ladies are still over there playing. And I'm just like, yes, yes. See, we talk about in these podcasts, we talk about how important it is in a world of social media for younger people to play tabletop games because they need that face-to-face interaction. We forget that older folks need that face-to-face interaction. I have many ladies and gentlemen in the church who are widows or widowers, and the only time during the week they get to really see other people is, one, if they go to the doctor, two, if there's a luncheon at the church, which we don't have those every week, three, Sunday morning worship or Sunday school. Those are the only times. So now having this after church allows them that opportunity to spend time with other people. And it allowed them to spend time with kids and younger folks as well. And it introduced some of the younger folks who like to play Settlers of Catan to games like dominoes and other types of games that they might not have seen, which are still really good games. There are some older games I'm not a fan of, but I love to play me some dominoes. I love some dominoes. So
Dominoes is great. Have you played King Domino?
no, I have not.
That'd be a good one for your lad, I think. Takes the idea of,
King.
in dominoes, you have to lay your dominoes down and match. Number one has to match up to number one. Number six has to match up to number six.
Right.
In King Domino, it's not got numbers on it, it's got land. So it's desert and sea might be on one tile,
Ooh.
forest and plains on another one, mines and wasteland. And you've got to match up forest to forest to build this kingdom, this 5x5 grid kingdom. And there's little huts on some of them which give you points, and you'll get points based on the number of huts you've got and the number of consecutive things linked together. It's
Sweet.
a fun math crunchy one at the end, and really fun to do because you're building an actual kingdom out.
Wow, that sounds like something I could use for a random game adventure generator.
Mm-hmm.
Or a random for role-playing games. I always look for ways to use other games for my role-playing games. With that in mind, speaking of role-playing games, I have been, and I don't know about Steven. I know Steven's talked about this some. He and I have talked about this off the air a few times, but a question I've been getting more of recently in my email since we started this podcast is about Christians and Dungeons and Dragons.
Mm.
Should Christians play Dungeons and Dragons?
Yes.
Should Christians play D&D? Questions about magic, and they ask about the Satanic Panic back in the 1980s and the book burnings, and how do they explain it to their church and all of these other things? How do they explain it to their Christian friends? And honestly, that's part of the ministry I've been doing as the geek preacher for the last 12 years. I've been a part of gaming conventions. Many of you who are watching this video already know I'm the chaplain of GaryCon, the old school gaming convention held in honor of the co-creator of Dungeons and Dragons, Gary Gygax. I set up the memorial table for GaryCon. Hopefully before GaryCon comes up in March, I'm going to be doing one of these podcasts, video blogs with Luke Gygax, one of the children of Gary Gygax, and have him on here, and we're going to talk about GaryCon a little bit. But these are questions I get a lot of, and I know Stephen faces some of those questions because he does a lot of work in the church as well. I'm still amazed after all these years. This is the year 2020. For 37 years in my life, because I remember when this first came up, it was 1984 in my life. The Satanic Panic started a little bit earlier than that. So about roughly 36 years of my life, people have had questions about it. And so what we're going to do today, Stephen has a number of questions. We're going to just kind of back and forth it, talk about it a little bit. But we polled our friends on a Slack we're on with a number of other Christian podcasters in the gaming world. And we said, hey, what questions do you guys get asked? What questions have you heard? So our friends over at Geek at Arms with Brian Ray, our friends over at Saving the Game with Peter Martin, our friends at MinMax, Ashley and Alan Mowers, and our friend, what is the name of the podcast that Paige and Grant do?
Gilmore Ball Z.
Gilmore Ball Z. If you ever want to talk about Gilmore Girls and Dragon Ball Z, that's the podcast.
Oh, yeah.
It's hilarious. It is funny. And like Dragon Ball Z, the episodes just keep going and going and going. And so, and Paige had some wonderful questions as well. In fact, Paige's questions were so often, we're thinking of saving some of those for another episode where we're going to talk about stuff. So now I've been doing a lot of talking. I'm going to turn things over to Stephen, and then he's going to throw questions out, and we're just going to back and forth it.
And to start with, I'll just do a little bit of my experience with the Satanic Panic, which isn't very much, I'll be honest. 1984, I wouldn't even have been a twinkle in my parents' eyes, and there was another 4 years yet before I was born. Just throwing that one there. But from what I understand of it, it was very much an evangelical issue. It didn't come across to other parts of the church very much. Possibly charismatics, definitely evangelicals will have heard about it. And also, it might have been quite conservative evangelicals, conservative charismatics, who are the ones who will have come across it the most in the UK. So there are people who I talk to now, my good friend Rev Andy Gray, who did that Songs of Praise thing, he wouldn't touch D&D initially because
Oh,
when he was younger, he remembers the worry about it. So obviously the panic came over. For me, having looked back at what first edition Dungeons and Dragons and Advanced D&D was, the artwork on the front cover will not have helped. Have we got one? There we go. Nice big demon on the front cover.
this is my signed copy, signed by Gary Gygax in 2007, before I was on the panel with him on faith and gaming, on Christianity and gaming. Yes, Gary Gygax in 2007 was on a panel on Christianity and gaming. He and I had a brief snack beforehand and talked for a while before that panel. I brought him in 5 minutes late to the panel, of course, because anybody who knows me knows you're going to be 5 minutes late if you hang out with me ahead of time, because, hey, that's just me. But yes, there is this. And then, of course, I'll be throwing up some stuff. And here's one of my favorite figures from back in the day, Mercion, good cleric female. So, both extremes of Dungeons and Dragons from back in the day.
And
But please continue.
yeah, that's the thing. It had demons on the front cover, and that's because demons were the big bad enemy. You could come across a dragon and talk to it. You could come across orcs and talk to them. You came across a demon, you were going to fight it and you were going to kill it. But that's something that we can come to later. Most of the time, you were not going to have a pleasant interaction with a demon. Let's put it that way.
Oh, never a pleasant interaction with a demon. And demons were never good. There were good dragons.
Yes. So I can see where it came from. It was something a lot of people have been teaching against the use of magic. A lot of people have been teaching against having demonic iconography anywhere. And then this game came along, which had magic in it. Well, magic in it. And had demonic iconography in it. And it just hit at the right time to really spur all that worry. A bit like video games. They cause violence, don't you know, in our young people. And social media, that causes violence in our young people, don't you know?
Well, see, back in the day, before video games were as violent as they are now, Stephen, back in the day, video games were bad in evangelical circles because they took you away from church, or they were a waste of money, or they were a waste of time.
And
And
to be
it
honest,
was actually later that the whole violence stuff came out. In the late 70s and early 80s, nobody said anything about the violence. It was about, oh, Christians should spend their monies more wisely. Christians should use their time more wisely. And then after they realized we live in a really rapid culture and that entertainment is okay, then they're like, oh, well, let's hit the violence issue of video
yeah,
games.
but let's face it, televisions, evil. Radios, evil.
They
Gramophone,
went We
evil.
went through that in America.
Art,
Americans, we
paintings, evil. We must just draw on cave walls. No, we don't even draw on cave walls. Just live in the moment and watch it. No, don't watch it. Keep your eyes closed. Don't do anything. No. Sorry, that's taking it to a silly degree, but
well, that's a part of our history in Christendom, though. Is this idea, this extreme asceticism? Don't eat, don't drink, don't touch, don't joy, don't have any joy. The only joy you should have, my brothers and sisters, is the joy of the Lord. The joy of the Lord is your strength. Why do you need joy in anything else?
at which point you say Jesus' first miracle was to get everybody drunk at a party.
Oh, man. Well, I won't even go into what when you have people twisting the Bible over here saying it wasn't fermented grape juice, you just have to laugh and go, whoa, okay. Yeah. But yes, that is a big thing, though, is there has been that strain in Christendom where nothing is supposed to be fun, and we try and take the fun out of everything.
Mm.
And one of the things that helped me a lot in that part of the journey, not was when I actually learned a little bit of Greek, and I began to read the Bible and to study more, and I realized Jesus was being sarcastic
Oh yeah.
at times. And so I tell people I have a hermeneutic, or a way of viewing the Bible sometimes, as I read it through the lens of sarcasm, because Jesus uses sarcasm to make a point. How can you not have a sense of humor if you're not sarcastic? Jesus was considered a wine bibber and a drunkard. He obviously enjoyed going out and eating meals with people. Jesus enjoyed life. And this is one of the things we cannot ignore in our Christian journey, is that life is meant to be enjoyed and experienced. We should not throw off all of these so-called pleasures. Yes, gluttony is a problem. Excess is a problem.
Mm.
Temperance is a virtue, but that doesn't mean we do away with everything, because that's just swinging the pendulum too far in the other direction.
Yeah. Everything in moderation.
Everything in moderation. Yes.
So that's my thing on the Satanic Panic and my experience of it, which, like I said, was none, pretty much. Let's swing that back to you. And yeah.
Well, my experience is different than a lot of Christians in the southern part of the United States, for a number of reasons. One is because as I mentioned, wherever I go, I did not grow up in a church-going family. My family was culturally Christian. That means if you ask my parents if they were Christian, they would said yes. But when I was growing up, I never remember attending church regularly. The most we would go to church is maybe once a year on Easter, and that didn't even happen every year.
Mm.
For the longest time, I wondered what Christmas had to do with Jesus, because Christmas was about Santa Claus. I found out what Christmas had to do with Jesus when I watched Charlie Brown Christmas special.
Mm.
So church was not a part of my background growing up on any regular basis. But I did read a lot, and I read a lot of mythology. I read Bullfinch's mythology, all of those things. So coming into Dungeons and Dragons was very simple for me. I remember seeing some guys playing it at school, and I wanted to play, but they wouldn't let me play because I did not have any D&D books.
Mm.
That was kind of like your entry fee, was to have some Dungeons and Dragons books. So that year, I believe it was probably 1983, the spring, February of 1983. I can remember when I got my first book. We were on Mardi Gras break. I'm from Louisiana, and in Louisiana, you get off during the week of Mardi Gras. They give you about 2 or 3 days off. And we went to spend some time with my stepdad's brother out in Texas. And we're walking through a mall. I purchased some I see a D&D book. I want to buy it. It's actually, I have it. I will show you which one it was. I don't have the very exact book, but I still have a copy of it. This is what it was. This is the Moldvay Dungeons and Dragons basic book.
Mm-hmm.
I picked this up at what may have been a Warhammer store. I don't know. All I know is they had a lot of fantasy miniatures in a mall, and it caught my eye. And I picked that up and I bought it. Well, I didn't buy it.
Mm-hmm.
My mom refused to buy it because she wasn't going to spend the money. My stepdad's sister-in-law, my step-aunt, had no children of her own. And I just kept wheedling my mom, knowing my mom would not give in. I was the youngest of 4 at home. There's no way mom's going to give in to this.
No.
But my step-aunt did. I think it was $4.95. Picked it up, and I read these, 63 pages with the glossary in probably 45 minutes at the most, and then read it again. I didn't have any of the funky dice or anything like that. And I read it. I came back to school. showed the guys my D&D book, and they're like, "You're in, dude. You're in. You have passed the initiation. You own a D&D book." And so we would play during recess at school. Our sessions, people today talk about they miss those 6-hour sessions from back in the day. Our sessions were 30 to 45 minutes long during break, or if we got to play in the library during library time.
Yeah.
Not very long. We didn't get to play after school a lot. Sometimes we'd play on the weekends. So that's how I got into D&D. And then I remember started hearing rumors about the satanic panic and some of the things going on. Later found out why that started. A lot of that started because of James Dallas Egbert getting so-called lost, and them thinking it was because he played D&D. But those rumors started going around, and we'd heard about it. Me and my gaming friends. One of the guys was a regular churchgoer. Another guy was a preacher's kid. They played with us, but they still played. So we didn't see a whole lot. And then one day I came home. All my D&D books were laid out across my bed. And I'm like, "Mom, what's going on? What's going on with all these D&D books?" She's like, "Oh, nothing. That's a bunch of bull." Beep. And I was like, "What do you mean?" She said, "Don't worry about it. Just put your books back up." And I saw that she threw something going in the trash. So, of course, being curious, I went and pulled it out of the trash. And it was like a one-page photocopied. It was mimeographed back then. They didn't even photocopy. Mimeographed thing that said, if you go to this page in this book, this shows where it's satanic. If you go to this page in this book, this shows where it's satanic. My mom went through all my books and couldn't find it. And couldn't find it, folks. That's how bad people are. They just make stuff up sometimes. She couldn't find it. Thankfully, she didn't look at my deities and demigods and see the nude pictures of goddesses, or I'd been in more trouble. But there's only one picture, and it's of Ishtar. If you've ever seen Freaks and Geeks, they actually make a joke about that. But it's no different than if you went into a museum and saw a statue.
Mm.
But so I give my mom credit for that, for looking through it, reading it, and going, there is nothing out of line here. There's nothing wrong here. And that was my experience with the satanic panic. Since that time, I have talked to people over the years who experienced their parents taking all their books out of their house, burning them. I talked to people who have told me stories about how their church condemned them. Pastors directly condemn them from the pulpit for playing Dungeons and Dragons. I've heard some horrible stories. I remember right after starting this whole geek preacher thing and being at it was probably Gen Con, probably 2008, 2009. And someone came up to me. I was wearing my clerical collar, and he said, "You guys are the reason I stopped going to church." And I said, "What do you mean, you guys?" And he told me his story, how they told him it was Dungeons and Dragons or the church. And he's like, "They're not just asking me to give up the game. They were asking me to give up my friends."
Yep.
And I said, "Man, dude, you got to understand, I'm the same age as you. It's not my fault. It's not the church's fault. It is a church's fault. It's that congregation's fault." And I had a long conversation with him. We communicated online for a while. I haven't heard from him in years, but if he watches this video, get back in touch with me. But that's been kind of my experience. Of course, I had my own book burning experience where when I did come to faith, I was attending some very evangelical conservative churches. And one of the problems when you get involved with any new organization, whether it's a church, whether it's a fraternity, there is this strong, overwhelming need for many of us to conform, to be a part of that group. It's not a need to just conform for conformity's sake. It's a need to conform to be accepted.
Yep.
And so I went to this church. This preacher got up. He preached against Dungeons and Dragons. He preached against fantasy novels and all of that stuff. And I went home and I said, well, God must want me to get rid of all this stuff. Because I had stopped and went to that church. It wasn't even my regular church. I just went to some special meetings I was invited to. Maybe this is God talking to me, telling me that all this stuff is evil. Even though I'd went through that with my mom probably 6 years before, that now here I am. I'm like, I want to conform. I want to be accepted. This will be a sign of how faithful I am. And so I took all my books, all my fantasy books, all my D&D books, some of that stuff's probably worth thousands of dollars today. And I went and burnt them. No, I did not hear any demons scream. No, there was not any great cries of horror. All I know is they made some of those books really, really good.
There was cries of horror. There was God crying in horror at what you were doing. To be
probably. Yeah, God probably was crying. Jesus wept. Jesus wept.
Because that is this whole thing, this whole satanic panic thing, was mass hysteria that gripped the nation following the James Dallas Egbert thing. It really got into the imaginations of people.
Well, and you got to understand, this is almost 10 years after James Dallas Egbert.
But it got into the public psyche to the point that it is still in the public psyche now.
Oh, definitely. Definitely.
And once it's become a myth, once it's become a mythos like that, it's very hard to shake it for some people, especially when you've got things like the Darkest Dungeon tract, which is what most people who are worried satanic panic wise will have read. Which comes
I remember the Darkest Dungeon one.
Yeah.
Elfleet, I supported the Kickstarter put out by some people a while back making fun of Darkest Dungeon track. We'll have to put a link to that video because they had a friend of mine take part in that project as their spiritual advisor. He's an evangelical Lutheran pastor in the Pacific Northwest. His name's Chris Ode. And Chris took part in that Darkest Dungeons movie, of which I have a copy, and I have a copy of the role-playing game. So you folks who don't know me, I've been a part of this for quite some time. But yeah, the whole James Dallas Egbert thing came up. We're going to link to that more in the show notes. There is a YouTube video on my Geek Preacher page, as well as an old page I used to have on YouTube, which I don't use anymore. But it is from the Faith and Gaming panel in 2007, actually the Christianity and Gaming panel in 2007, which had Gary Gygax on it, as well as Michael Stackpole. Michael Stackpole, many of the Warhammer folks will know who Michael Stackpole is. He was the gaming apologist back in the 1980s for TSR and other tabletop role-playing companies back in the day. So there is a lot of material out there, and we're going to link you to a lot of that.
Before we move on to the questions, one thing I do want to say on that Darkest Dungeon tract is for those who are still listening at this point and are going, yes, but it does make me worry. The people who published that is a company called Jack Chick Publishing. And in their home state, they are classed as a hate group. They deliberately publish things to make you hate people. That is their whole motive. And their whole idea is to try and make Christians hate other people. So you have a choice at this point, before we carry on, if you're still in that umming and ahhing bit because of Darkest Dungeon, are you going to listen to me and Derek, who, we're good people, as much as you can be, or are you going to listen to a hate group? That's the decision.
I also have my own experience with Jack Chick Publications. They are, for those of you not familiar with them, they didn't just put out Darkest Dungeon. They also put out a number of evangelical gospel tracts. Gospel tracts are little informations on how to become a Christian or how to follow Jesus. They did so in a way that was very similar to propaganda done in the 1940s and 50s. They published them in comic book form so that it was easy to read by children. Another thing for any of our Roman Catholic friends who are watching, Jack Chick at Publications has put out over the years many negative things about the Roman Catholic Church and how they're satanic. They pretty much, any group that does not agree with their evangelical form of Christianity is satanic. Jack Chick says that Roman Catholics are satanic. Jack Chick Publication says Freemasons are satanic. Jack Chick Publication says Jehovah's Witnesses are satanic. He doesn't say they're wrong. He doesn't say he disagrees with them. He says they are servants of the devil. Now, here's the thing. If you think any of those groups are satanic, you think any of those groups are just inherently evil, I can already tell you, Stephen and I disagree with you on that. You're probably not going to like the rest of what we have to say. We're putting this video out today, as our friend Brian Ray said, for those of you who are sitting on the fence or wanting ways to explain your love of fantasy, your love of tabletop role-playing games, your love of Dungeons and Dragons to other people. This is who this video's for. If you already think all this stuff is evil, we've already had some YouTube comments on one of these things about that was some crazy stuff about D&D. Sometimes we delete them, sometimes we leave them there because we need a good laugh. But this is not something that's theoretical for us. We both have had journeys through the Christian faith. We're both still very Orthodox Christians. We both believe in a physical bodily resurrection of Jesus Christ. We both believe he died, was physically killed. We're not what you'd call very liberal Christians in that sense of the word. We're liberal in that we're generous. We have a generous orthodoxy. See what I did there? But we're both very Orthodox Christians. We believe in the Nicene Creed. We find that the Bible is our sufficient guide to salvation and trust in God. So you know, this is who we are. This is a journey I have been on since 1992. Some of our viewers were not even born then. As he said, you know, I say that as part of my Christian journey, 1992. I have been playing D&D since 1983. I gave up D&D for a time because I believed it was evil. But I came back into the fold through this crazy, wild, and nutty British guy by the name of Clive Staples Lewis. And then I found out this other crazy British guy by the name of J.R.R. Tolkien was a Christian. Then I found out this other crazy United Kingdom fellow by the name of George MacDonald was a Christian minister. That's why I was a part of a documentary on these fellows, because these people influenced my journey, and without their influence, I probably would not be a follower of Jesus today. I would not talk about God's love manifested in the person of Jesus. I'm sorry, Stephen. I'm just going to go on preaching here.
No, it's fine.
But this is important to me because fantasy is important. And so if you're out there, friends, and you're on the fence or you want some stuff, that's what we're about to do. We're going to pause the video here for just a second because I've got some family coming home in just a few minutes. I need to unlock the door for them. But if we'll just pause the video right here and then we're going to pick right back up, okay? Okay, we're back. Oh, right. I unlocked the door and I went to the bathroom, so we're good to go.
Hey.
All right.
So, let's get into some of these questions then, and we'll go through them slightly snappier because it's starting to get late. And
yes,
work is very busy at the moment, so I'm very tired. First one, and this is a very good one. This came from Brian, and again, these aren't questions that the people who have asked them think. These are questions that they have been asked.
Yes. Now, Brian Ray has been with the Christian Gamers Guild, an organization which I'm a part of, and I've been a part of since the 1990s, and he is one of the co-hosts of the podcast Geek at Arms, which we're also going to be linking to in our show notes. So Brian and I have both worked with this heavily, probably for 20 or more years. So what did Brian have to ask us, Stephen?
So the first one is, the Bible says, set your mind on things above. How do you justify using your God-given imagination to dwell on sorcery and violence?
Well, first of all, it begs the question. I tell people, it says you're assuming that I'm already dwelling on sorcery and violence. Number one, you're assuming that's what I'm dwelling on, which is a bad assumption.
Mhm.
Uh, let me get into the magic of D&D. First of all, magic of D&D is purely a functional thing for combat. It is not meant to be some grand ritual or spell. The magic spells, and you can see this in the video with Gary Gygax, they talk about this. The magic fireball spell, for example, was meant to replicate a catapult attacking a castle. It comes out of miniatures warfare, miniatures gaming. Second, uh, there's another spell, a gust of wind. Do you know what the material component for that spell was?
Feather.
A legume.
Oh, legume.
Yes, gas.
Yes.
Because gust of wind, it was a big poot in the face. So it was a lot of jokes and humor going on there behind the scenes that if you look and you read between the lines, you know that. So the spells were not meant to engage with real world sorcery. It was just something meant to be funny and humorous, or it was meant to serve a function in combat.
Mhm.
As for violence, this is true. And there are a lot of people who do dwell on violence and they relish the violence. We can't help that. There are people that relish violence in movies and film and culture. Are you relishing the violence if you play chess and you take another character off the board? Because that's what chess originally was. It was a war game. It was meant to teach you strategy. And so when you when you took an opponent's pawn off the board, you were in effect killing that pawn. So there is that. Yes, one can use their imagination to dwell on the violence, relish the violence. And sometimes when I was younger, we did that, but I moved beyond that. I Many of the early D&D games and many of the newer ones that are coming out, we're seeing a resurgence of this again. There's a focus on puzzles and clues and mysteries. It all depends on what your focus is. And like most things, this is an American value, which I agree with wholeheartedly. It comes down to personal choice and personal reaction. How are you going to handle it? Are you going to relish the violence? Are you going to do that? I mean, I've played a paladin before who relished violence against the evil and the wicked. And I used that as an opportunity to work through how I dealt with violence. You
Mm.
can check out some more of that on the Saving the Game podcast if you'd like, that I recently did with Peter Martin and Ashley Mowers. But violence is up to you and how you respond to it. And if you're dwelling on that, you need to check yourself.
Yeah.
Go
Also,
ahead.
when it comes down to your imagination and violence, has anybody read the Old Testament?
Amen, brother.
Right, next one then. Um, Again, this ties into that one. Um, and again, I need to qualify, this isn't Brian's question. This is a question Brian has been asked in the past. And it's, I understand that players are encouraged to engage in rape and murder inside the game. How do you reconcile that with your faith?
I have never seen that. I saw some jokes about it when I was a 14-year-old kid in the 1980s, and I saw other teenage boys looking at one another and going, "That ain't cool, man. That ain't cool." I have heard about games where that's happened, and we have many female gamers who speak out against that to this day. And so the question is number one, who are you playing with? Are you playing with people that want to do that, man? That's
Yeah.
that's messed up. Whether you're a Christian or not, that's just messed up. And I know a lot of non-Christians who play D&D, and they would never allow that type of thing in their game.
Yeah.
Uh, I know people that don't even use that as a plot device, like go rescue the princess who's about to be raped or molested. They don't even put that in their games because that messes with people.
Yeah.
You know, I, I mean, these are simple things. I go, are you crazy? What the heck were you thinking? Why would you do that?
There's a big problem that people look at D&D and they look at fantasy books and they think, oh, male power fantasy. male power fantasy. It's got to be that. But actually, no, it's not like that. For the vast majority of players, it's not. You do get twisted individuals who will use it that way, who are doing it for a power trip.
Well,
That's
I have
nothing
to
to
I
do
have to
with it.
back up. I have to back up. In the 1980s, we had a lot of guys who did view that as a male power trip. But who were these guys? This was some of my experience and some of the experiences later on I experienced in life, and we could do a whole podcast on this. But these young men who used it as a male power fantasy, uh, especially back in the 80s, were young men like myself who were geeky and nerdy, who often felt very powerless, very weak. And so sometimes we did make mistakes back then.
Oh yeah,
Sometimes we turned it into a power trip.
but I mean, D&D allows you to feel powerful without you having to go down that route. That's one of the joys of D&D. It gives you that you become well, it's not even you becoming, you are acting as a powerful character, somebody who affects change in the world. That's where the power comes from.
Oh, exactly, exactly. And one of the things too that a lot of people don't realize, and you can go back and read old Dragon magazine articles written by Gary Gygax. One of the things he always encouraged was heroic fantasy.
Yeah.
And that was you played the hero. In fact, in the early editions of D&D, as it was coming out, often the players were referred to as heroes and superheroes. They were not meant to do evil or bad or wicked things. Gary has said, and in a conversation I had with Gary Gygax, he said he never liked people playing evil or wicked characters.
Yeah.
The idea was heroic fantasy. And so even me as a powerless geek in the 1980s, when we did go on those power trips in those games, one of the things that always held me back from going too far, even though I wasn't a churched person, didn't have a lot of traditional Christian morality, I did want to be a hero. I wanted to be the good guy. I didn't want to be the bad guy.
Yeah.
And this is a part of the history of the game. It's a part of the culture of the game, is the idea you get to be the hero. And I think that's something that we can do as Christians when we run these games, is we give people the opportunity to be a hero in very difficult situations.
Yeah. And I think as well, it comes down to the age-old motto of when playing games, when doing anything in life, don't be a doofus. Simple as that. Don't be a doofus. Right. Moving on to some more questions. I'm just double checking exactly who this came from. I think it's from Peter Martin, this one. And again, questions he's been asked, not questions that he has himself. We have got where are we? What makes you think the fact that what makes you think the fact that the demons in the game are actually fictional? So basically, are the demons in the game fictional, or are they actually real and just messing with your head?
Okay, this is a question. We even got something similar to this on our Facebook page where someone was going, "Oh, these demonic names are real."
Mm,
Well, number one, you can go in the Bible and you will. And someone's probably going to correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, and I probably am here. But I could only remember one demon named in the Bible, and that demon is Legion, and it was meant as a plurality. So it's not even a name of a demon. It says, "We are Legion." Most of the demonic names come from apocryphal literature, which was written in the Middle Ages. Middle Ages. The New Testament was pretty much all the books we have in the New Testament were finished by 100 AD. So most of these so-called demons were probably not written around until 1100 AD. So about 1,000 years later, people say, well, what about the Old Testament? The Old Testament uses the name of gods. It doesn't call them demons. later in Christian interpretation has been to call all those old gods that the Israelites fought against demons, but that's not how the Bible calls them. It calls them gods. Sometimes it calls them false gods, but it does not refer to them as demons. Those come from extra biblical sources. If you want to trust those sources, that's fine and that's good. But as someone who has a historical background, who has a background in church history, who is a theologian trained, I would say, number one, these demonic names are not names of real demons as we know them. They're just not. That said, are you saying, Derek, there are no demons? I'm going to tell you, Jesus talks about demons in the New Testament. If we take Jesus seriously, yes, we do. My personal experience with that was when this was in the mid to late 90s. I was in a game store in Jackson, Tennessee, and I saw some new D&D books. I went and picked them up. And this lady, who was probably maybe about 5 or 6 years older than me, was there with her little girl getting something totally different, because this was a hobby store as well. And so I had my D&D books, and she's like, "Oh, Dungeons and Dragons, isn't that the game where you worship those demons?" And I said, "No, ma'am, this is a game where we kill the demons."
Yep.
And she just laughed and said, "Oh, that's pretty cool." And so, however you want to view it, I mean, the demons are these these antagonists. Demons are people who bring up the Faustian deal. So if a demon pops up in my game, they're not even necessarily going to be this big bad evil guy. They're going who's trying to just slay you. They might be someone in my game who's trying to tempt you.
Yeah.
And I like to see how players deal with that temptation. I did that in a game I ran. One of my longer running games is I tempted them with a lot of Faustian bargains. And I had people accept it. And they got to play out that character, and they were really happy. Oh, look at all this power my character just got because I made this deal with the devil. And then they got to see the results of it. Yeah. And so one of the greatest things here I am, a grown man, we're in a game. Some of them are teenagers in high school. And one of them looks at me and says, now, I was not in ministry at this time, so it made it even better. They just knew me as a guy who worked for a company. And one of the kids looked at me and said, "You know what? Maybe I shouldn't have made a deal with the devil. Those were some pretty bad results." I said, "You think?"
Yeah.
So, yeah, demons can be in the game. They can be used in the game. But just saying a demon's name is not going to make that demon jump into your soul. If it did, we'd all be in trouble. Yep. Every single one of us, so that I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, Stephen. It ties into another question. Again, saying, don't you think it's better, with all the occult elements in the game, to just condemn it and stay away rather than taking the risk?
Wow.
Yeah.
With all the sexism, physical injuries, racism in American football, maybe you should just stay away from it and condemn it.
Yeah.
With all the sex and violence and the mistreatment of women in Hollywood, maybe you should just condemn movies and never go to them again. With all the hatred and the bigotry in American politics and worldwide politics, maybe you should just stay away from politics and never go to the polls again.
I'm going to go a step further and say, with all the hatred, bigotry, the anger, the violence, the rape, the murder, and the general nastiness, maybe you should just avoid and condemn the Bible. Let's be honest. If that's something to make you condemn something, there's occult practices talked about in the Bible. So, if that being talked about is enough for you to avoid something, you should be avoiding the Bible.
Yeah, and just because those things are in the game does not mean the game condones it. But the level that people have accused the game of having those things in it is not has not been my experience. And you have to understand, I've played this game as a Christian. I played this as someone who was not a church going person. I have played this game, I played this game at a point in my life when I would have considered myself an atheist. I played this game at various points in my life, and I have yet to see that. I've heard stories about it, and some of those stories have been bad. Some of them have been true, and I'm just like, well, what did you do? And they said I didn't play with those people anymore.
Exactly.
Well, there you go.
It's not the game, it's the people. And
Right.
that's a lot of this boils down to that. It's not the game, it's the people you are choosing to play with. The people who
And I've had to leave games before. I've had to leave games when there was sexist talk, misogynistic talk. I played in a game once where somebody was doing some really cruel things to NPCs, and my character stood up and stopped them from doing it. And other people in the game afterwards said, "I'm glad you did that. We didn't really want to do that." And I was like, "Look, man, somebody's got, even if it's just a game, somebody's got to stand up what's for right.
yeah,
What
that
you have to stand
segues
up for what."
that segues into something that's um a really big thing at the moment, which is lines and veils and consent in gaming.
Yeah.
Um, the Monty Cook last year released a pre-game consent sheet in which you say
Yes.
what things you're comfortable with and what things you're not comfortable with.
Yeah.
And I think that's great. We should know what
And
we're comfortable with.
with that in mind, I do want to make a point. Some of what we're talking about is very much for mature adults. I would say if you're running a game, make sure your game with a consent sheet that's there is rated for the people you're running it for.
Yes.
I've run D&D style games for my son at various ages in his life. Some have been rated G, some have been rated PG, not above that. My son's only 10 years old. Our daughter, I've run games and played in games with her with games that have been PG-13 to almost R rated by violence and things like that.
Yeah.
And because there were some grown-up themes going on, and we had great conversations. And that was a recent game just a few months ago. I wasn't running the game, I was playing in the game, and my daughter had questions about it and she's 21 years old, and we had a wonderful conversation. But I will say this for any aspiring game masters out there: make sure you use some sort of consent form, and make sure you're aware of the themes you're presenting to your players,
Yep.
and be very cautious as an adult if you're running games for minors in the themes that you present.
Which ties into a question from Paige that we've got that says the artwork in some tabletop games seems to be pretty sexual, and D&D seems to be based around violence. Is D&D immoral slash not kid appropriate? And I think we've actually answered that one there. It's all it's storytelling.
Right.
Or is every book in the world suitable for kids? And the answer is simple. The answer to that is no. No, it is not. You
Well,
would not
here's the
allow your
thing.
child to read 50 Shades of Grey.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
the same sort of thing.
well, here's the thing that you'll find out about D&D. It has, like many things, evolved. In some of the earliest versions of D&D, um, people like Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson, they came out of a pulp background where you had pulpy books. And pulpy books were known for scantily dressed women. That was a part of the culture, and some of the early D&D books did have pictures on them that would consider inappropriate. I will say that the culture has changed where the game's concerned. My son's home, so he'll probably run in here in just a moment. But I will say the culture of the game the culture of the art began to evolve over time.
Yeah.
I will say many of the people grew and did not do it. I remember having a conversation once with Larry Elmore, who's that's his picture back there. Larry Elmore is a great friend. And Larry Elmore has been known for doing some scantily dressed artwork of women in many of his paintings. And one of the things Larry said was his wife would not let him do anything too racy, and that his wife did that. I'd also point out that art has transformed over the centuries. Rubens was known for making one of the great Renaissance artists. Rubens has a style of art named after him. It's called Rubenesque, and many of the women were scantily clad. Yes, that is an issue in our culture. We have sexualized women to a degree that's inappropriate. I would say the newer editions of Dungeons and Dragons, we saw a move away from that,
Yeah.
especially in third edition with the desexualization of women in the game where they weren't walking around in just chainmail bikinis. I'd actually say that tabletop role-playing games are better about their artwork now than many of the video games that are on the market.
Really?
So, I mean, like right here, this is the cover of the Dungeon Master's Guide for 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. And, you know, there's no scantily clad women on there, though there is an undead Lich Lord. So if you have a problem with, you know, undead Lich Lords, well, then I'm sorry. But, I mean, just opening up to a random page here, you know, the artwork is not like it used to be. Yes, I'm not going to defend things that were very puerile and very evocative. They were meant to. That's how they got their attention. I read Conan the Barbarian in the 1980s, Savage Sword of Conan, and there was a lot of artwork in it. Pulp novels had them on the cover. All kinds of things were going on during that time. The key is, I would say, our hobby, like many other things, is evolving, and people are moving away from that.
Yeah.
They're moving away from sexualization in general, especially when they know kids are a part of it. That's one of the things that they did in the 1980s as well with what is often referred to as BECME, or the Basic Expert Companion Master and Immortals rule set of D&D. That was much more kid-friendly sometimes than AD&D was in the 1980s. That artwork was not nearly as risque and had a really cool feel about it. Errol Otis, who was not always known for doing you know, non-risque art, did some really good art for it back then. Larry Elmore's art that was used in the basic rule set back then was not very risque at all either. So there is an awareness of who that art is for. Just like in any other thing that's out there, you need to be aware of who you're making that art for, who your audience is, what is the age of it. So as a grown man who's a Christian, who's a pastor, I can look at some art and I can go, okay, that's inappropriate for even me. That doesn't need to be here, and I can choose not to buy it. My son's not old enough to make that decision yet, so I have to make that decision for him. And again, this comes down to using discernment. You know, I read somewhere, I think it was that Bible book we've been talking about, that is a gift of the Holy Spirit, discernment. With all of this we've been talking about, my friends, one of the big things is here, if it's a problem for you, then don't play.
Yep.
But if it's not a problem for your friend and they're enjoying it, don't bother them.
Don't be a doofus.
Yeah. Or as Will Wheaton said, don't be a dick. All right.
Yeah,
I'll say
I've been polite.
well, Stephen's polite. I'm not always so polite. Don't be a jerk.
The last question that I've got on here, and we'll both just chip in with this really quickly, would be: people feel uncomfortable playing Magic. What games would you recommend for people who don't feel comfortable playing Magic? And we've talked a lot about Dungeons and Dragons, but there are hundreds of different settings out there, thousands of different settings out there.
Where should I begin?
Exactly. You don't have to do Dungeons and Dragons. If your problem is with Dungeons and Dragons, play a different role-playing game.
And I can recommend some right now. Traveler, one of the first science fiction role-playing games out there. Good friend of mine, Mark Miller, has been doing that. Mark is a Christian, a wonderful person, has been tremendously supportive of the ministry I do as the Geek Preacher. He started Traveler either in the late 70s, early 80s. It's a fun science fiction role-playing game. There is also Gamma World. It's not as easy to find that as now. There's an old school game called Mutant Future. You can Google Mutant Future. A lot of post-apocalyptic games that are out there that I would recommend, many of which I love. Here's one I have right here. I have been looking at. I kind of like this. I like stuff with a pulpy feel. This is called Hollow Earth Expedition. It's basically kind of a Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. What is it with me and all the Brits, man? But Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, did the Journey to the Center of the Earth books. This is based around that. There's a John Carter of Mars, based off the writings of Robert E. Howard, where John Carter goes to Mars. Modifius put that out. There is one that I'm wanting to try out really soon. I've actually did a play test of this recently, and I bought the box set. Star Trek Adventures, 1995 retail. I don't even get paid for this stuff, man. They should endorse it. You know what I'm saying, Stephen? This is also put out by Modifius. Guess what else? But I'm going to get to play test really soon. This coming Saturday, the Fallout tabletop role-playing game by Modifius. I'm going to be play testing that. We're part of a non-disclosure agreement, so I can't go into details on that. There are tons of games out there. If you want more information, hit us up at the Dungeon Pastors on Twitter.
Yep.
For what we'd recommend or what we're playing, hit me up at the Geek Preacher on Twitter. I think it's Geek Preacher. I can't remember if I put the in that or not.
Okay,
hit us up on Facebook.
Preacher will find you.
Yeah. Just Google Geek Preacher. You will find me.
I want to throw in a couple of game suggestions. I don't have the physical books for them. It's all PDFs for me because I'm poor. But there is one called Lancer. The rules for that are available for free. That is giant mechs. So there's no magic in that one. It is giant robots.
Yeah.
So the bits in between the giant robot combat are really narrative. And then the combat is really meaty and chunky, which is awesome. And then there's another one called that I've backed that hasn't come out yet, called Magical Kitties Save the Day, where you play as cats that are saving their owners from the scary things that lurk in the dark, all that sort of stuff. The entire world of Numenera by Montecote Games. Magic in that is technology.
Right.
So I mean, they may call things magic, potentially may call it spells, but it's set something like 2-3 million years into the future. So there's been multiple civilizations that have sprung up on Earth, and this is what's after that. The technology has infused things, so it works differently. So it's not magic; it's technology. And what's the other one? Masks, which is a superhero one. But instead of playing as just a superhero, you're playing as teenage superheroes who are still trying to find their powers. And every action that you take has an influence on how your character sees themselves. Because it's all about growing and coming of age. And just amazing things for you to try. All of which don't involve magic if you don't want them to.
Yeah, one of the things you can also do with your games, like Numenera does, it's a part of one of Arthur C. Clarke's 3 laws that he had. And Arthur C. Clarke was a famous science fiction writer. And one of the things he talked about, he said, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So if you're worried about magic in your games, what are the things you can do to help you out there? If that is a problem for you or for your players or for the parents of your players, all you have to say is they think it's magic, but it's actually technology.
Yeah.
Personally, I don't like to do that because I'm a really big believer in imagination and in mystery. I don't have to line out how magic works in a world. I just like that there's magic there because I like a world with mystery, because I believe the real world is filled with mystery, and the real world is filled with things we can't always explain. I'm a big science geek, but I still love my mystery. I still love fantasy, and I love to believe, like they said on the X-Files, something's out there. So that's a part of it. I mean, faith is a magical thing.
It certainly is. And I think that is a brilliant part for us to bring this to a close. So, obviously, as usual, check us out on Twitter, check us out on Facebook, search for the Dungeon Pastors, you'll find us. We are on Twitter, we are on Facebook, so have a look there. I'll just end with a quick prayer for us. I'll just say, Lord, thank you for giving us our imagination that we can use to explore fantastical worlds. And we pray that through those explorations of fantastical worlds, we and our listeners can get to know you better, to understand your world better through play. I ask that in your name, Lord. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Amen. Amen. That's the best I can do.